Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. It's Thursday, the 23rd of May in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Rishi Sunak gambles it all on a summer election as inflation in the UK cools and growth picks up.
UK ministers question the decision to call a vote amid a huge polling gap with Labour.
And levelling up, Nvidia delivers on the AI hype with yet another blowout sales forecast.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has named the date of the next UK election as the 4th of July. Voters will head to the polls months before many in his Conservative Party expected. In a statement outside number 10 Downing Street, he said the country needs clear leadership.
These uncertain times call for a clear plan and bold action to chart a course to a secure future. You must choose in this election who has that plan, who is prepared to take the bold action necessary to secure a better future for our country and our children.
Rishi Sunak speaking there in the rain as his announcement was partly drowned out by protesters playing Labour's 1997 victory anthem, Things Can Only Get Better. Labour leader Keir Starmer kicked off his own campaign, saying his party can put an end to recent turmoil.
On the 4th of July, you have the choice. And together, we can stop the chaos, we can turn the page, we can start to rebuild Britain and change our country.
Well, the election announcement shocked Westminster, with Bloomberg learning even Sunak's own chancellor was blindsided by the decision. Many had expected a wait until November in the hope that improving economic data would boost public sentiment. Bloomberg's James Wilcock has more now.
Rishi Sunak has long said any election would come in the second half of the year. But even his own cabinet was stunned to find out that meant the 4th of July. One minister told Bloomberg the timing was terrible, with another suggesting Sunak had given up. The move has wiped out any prospect of the current government giving an autumn fiscal statement or tax cuts, which many in the party had hoped for. A host of other legislation is also left unfinished, including Sunak's smoking ban, something he listed as one of his key achievements in his speech yesterday. In London, James Wilcock, Bloomberg Radio.
As the political parties begin their campaigns, polling aggregator Britain Elects puts the Labour Party more than 20 points ahead of the Conservatives in polling. However, one glimmer for Sunak came in the BBC's projected national vote share after the recent local elections. That put Labour on 34% in a general election and the Tories on 25%. Well, that's still a 9-point deficit. It's significantly lower than other polls. Meanwhile, Britain Elects has aggregated polls for the other political parties that puts Reform at almost 12%, the Liberal Democrats at 10% and the Greens at 6%.
So that in the UK. Let's move on, though, and talk about results. Nvidia has delivered a bullish sales forecast for the coming months, driving shares up as much as 7.8% in extended trading. The chipmaker at the centre of the artificial intelligence boom now expects second quarter revenue of around $28 billion. And CEO Jensen Huang isn't pushing back on the lofty expectations, calling it the dawning of a new era.
The next industrial revolution has begun. Companies and countries are partnering with Nvidia to shift the trillion-dollar installed base of traditional data centers to accelerated computing and build a new type of data center, AI factories, to produce a new commodity, artificial intelligence.
The upbeat outlook from Jensen Huang's company reinforces Nvidia's status as the biggest beneficiary of the AI boom. The firm's market cap now tops $2.3 trillion as the likes of Amazon and Microsoft use Nvidia's AI accelerator chips that help data centers develop things like chatbots and other cutting-edge tools.
Minutes from May's Federal Reserve meeting show a willingness amongst policymakers to hold interest rates higher for longer. Whilst officials agreed that policy was well positioned, some mentioned that they were open to tightening further if needed. Bloomberg's Mike McKee says some participants also questioned the efficacy of elevated borrowing costs.
Many participants commented on their uncertainty about the degree of restrictiveness. High rates, they felt, might be having smaller effects than in the past. The neutral rate, or R*, might be higher than previously thought, or potential growth might be slower than they had estimated. For now, the decision was to maintain the current policy path for longer should inflation not resume falling.
That's Bloomberg correspondent Mike McKee there. The minutes offer a more nuanced picture than Fed Chair Jerome Powell's May the 1st press conference, where he shared an expectation that current rates would bring inflation down to the central bank's 2% target. Investors are betting on 1 to 2 rate cuts this year, according to futures markets.
BHP has secured an extra week to convince Anglo American of its takeover plan. The mining giants agreed to hold talks after Anglo rejected a third proposal worth about $49 billion. Bloomberg's Alex Steele says that getting a tie-up across the line is exceptionally challenging.
The issue is that the deal is complicated. They want Anglo-American to spin off all its South African assets first and then agree to the takeover. Now, Anglo-American does not like that idea. They think it's too complicated and obviously undervalues the company. And Anglo is proposing its own restructuring as well. And that is also, guess what, spinning off some of their South African assets like De Beers.
Bloomberg's Alex Steele. The news came just hours before a regulatory cut-off for BHP to either commit to an offer or walk away for 6 months under UK takeover rules. The two sides now have until the 29th of May to come up with an agreement. Now, in a moment, we'll bring you details of Nvidia's really staggering earnings report and the share price bump that we saw afterwards. But there's really only one place to start today, and that's with the surprise announcement that the UK will go to the polls for a general election on the 4th of July. Look, there were so many rumours, and there had been a few weekends where there had been sort of flurries of rumours, but then that really took hold yesterday because of the inflation data. This economy has been so difficult for the Conservatives that when the inflation figure yesterday dropped to 2.3%, there was really then much more speculation about, you know, when the next election would be.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, look, the interesting thing was, as we were looking at the inflation data yesterday and saying, oh, this is not as bad, this is not as good as we thought it was going to be. It wasn't as low as we thought it was going to be in that reading, but apparently the powers that be in Downing Street decided that was going to be enough for them to launch their election campaign on the back of it. And what a start to polling it was. Rishi Sunak in the pouring rain.
Yeah, I think it was a real surprise. We'd had beautiful sunshine the day before, but the day of this announcement, he was absolutely drenched, and that was and also drowned out by the music of the kind of Labour anthem, things can only get better.
Yeah, which the protester Steve Bray, who was playing it, said he didn't do it for Labour. He did it because it was the top trolling song for the Conservatives, just in case you were wondering.
Yeah, absolutely. OK, well, let's get a bit more detail then on the general election set for the 4th of July with our UK government correspondent and reporter Joe Mays, who's with us to set up really what the next 6 weeks of campaigning will look like. Joe, very good morning to you. The Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition projected very different images in their speeches yesterday. The pouring rain of Downing Street, the other in a wood-panelled room surrounded by Union Jack flags. Does this set the tone for the campaign?
Good morning. A danger that it does. These are kind of things that probably shouldn't matter, but they often do, in that if voters often have a limited engagement with politics, on a day like yesterday, what they might have seen was, yes, that picture of Sunak drenched in Downing Street, and then a glimpse of Starmer looking quite prime ministerial in that room. So yeah, this can set a tone. I mean, especially when the narrative going into this moment is that the Conservative Party is accused by Labour of being, 14 years of failure. They should be on the way out. They've run out of ideas. They're kind of a washed out party. That kind of visual image isn't great when it kind of can feed into that narrative. You remember back to 2017, Theresa May giving her party conference speech when the set fell apart behind her, and it seemed to kind of chime with the decline of her leadership. Will this go down as the image that we remember, when the Conservative Party, 20 points behind the polls, called an election that they went on to lose? Who knows? We'll see. It's going to be very interesting 6 weeks ahead.
It certainly is. Now, you've been reporting that even the Chancellor was caught by surprise by this announcement. Why do you think Sunak chose to go now?
I think there are lots of reasons. I think one is that there's a chance he can time this election with progress on the Rwanda deportation. So if he can get a flight away in the next kind of weeks, then that will be a helpful thing to help him frame the campaign around migration. And they see migration as an area where they have an upper hand against Labour. So there's that. I think there's also a realization that the economy picture might be at its best at this point in time and wouldn't have got any better for them. I think that with those inflation numbers, as you say, coming down to 2.3%, he could declare that victory. But also, there was really a realization within number 10, the Treasury in recent weeks, that they just weren't going to have the money to do any kind of more tax cuts in the autumn before an autumn election. So given that you can't do that, well, why not just do the election now? Why wait, given that you can't pull that trigger on that kind of pre-election weapon of the tax cuts? So yeah, an economic reason there, and I think a migration reason as well.
Yeah, okay. What do you see then, though, as the other key sort of battleground issues in the campaign?
So I think that the Conservative Party wants to make this big deal about clarity and certainty over what each party would do. So Rishi Sunak in front of Downing Street yesterday was saying, look, you know what we're about, you know what we're doing. You don't know what Labour does. You don't know what Keir Starmer's going to do. He attacks the fact that, when Keir Starmer became leader of the Labour Party, he had various pledges, which he then dropped. So there's like a trust issue in this election. I think that the voters will have to decide, do I want to stick with what I know? And if what I know is perhaps not been the best in recent years, or do I take the gamble with the new guys, with the guys who haven't been in power for so long? That'll be a key choice. But I think also, as I mentioned, the economy will obviously be front and center. Labour say they want to fight this election on the economy. They're kind of really trying to take the fight to the Tories on that. I'm sure we hear a lot about the Liz Truss episode and Labour saying, look, don't forget that, guys. Remember what the Conservative Party did. And I said migration will also be key. And an interesting thing to watch today is what will happen at reform, because they're promising a press conference. Nigel Farage could make an appearance. He might have a role to play in this election. So lots of things to watch out for.
Joe, what should we be keeping in mind about the fiscal situation in the UK right now, going into a series of weeks where we're going to be hearing a lot of promises about public spending?
I think we should remember that the fiscal situation is very fragile for the UK. I mean, a report from the IMF saying that £30 billion of savings need to be made by the government to stabilise the debt situation. And that's the inheritance the next government would face. And that means that pretty much inevitably we are entering a phase where there'll have to be some kind of tax rises or spending cuts in the absence of some major pickup in growth to stabilise the public finances. So Labour are cautious in their economic messaging because they recognise this. Rachel Reeves was saying effectively this only yesterday, that the economic inheritance is bleak. So I think neither party can really afford to make massive eye-catching commitments on tax and spend, because they'd have to pretty much immediately go back on them if they won power. So it'll be an awkward campaign on the economy in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. OK, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Joe Mays, our UK government reporter, going to be very busy over the next 6 weeks.
To another story we're following this morning. Nvidia, the chipmaker at the centre of the artificial intelligence boom, says revenue in the second quarter will be about $28 billion, even higher than estimates. That's after the company reported first quarter results that also beat expectations. As of Wednesday's close of trading on Wall Street, Nvidia's shares have surged by 92% this year. Joining us now for more, Bloomberg tech editor Vlad Savov. Vlad, great to have you with us. Just put this in scale for us. How strong were these results?
I mean, it's remarkable. It's something that only Nvidia is capable of doing. It has no seasonality anymore. It reported $26 billion of sales in the quarter that just concluded, and it's projecting another $28 billion. And this compares to previous years, which have had smaller sales.
So the quarterly sales now bigger than the yearly sales. That is staggering for any business. Nvidia also announced, though, a stock split, and it raised its dividend. How much will that please investors and raise expectations?
Well, one of the things to keep in mind here is that the share price surged beyond $1,000 for the first time ever. So the stock split is just making it more attainable, more affordable to a wider audience. We have to keep in mind that Nvidia, until 2 or 3 years ago, was a gaming company. And actually, I've been covering it since it has been a gaming company. And when you look at its projection for gaming sales, they were right in line, 2.6 billion. But that also gives you a sense of the scale of how big AI is. It overrides everything else.
Vlad, is there any sense of anyone being able to catch up to Nvidia in this as well? I mean, is it a company that has competitors snapping at its heels?
Well, everybody's trying. AMD is the nearest competitor, both geographically and in technology. They're both based in Santa Clara, a stone's throw away from each other. And then you have the likes of Google, Meta, Amazon. They're all developing their own chip technology, their own server chips. They have them in place, but they don't have the same sort of AI accelerator capability. The interesting stage is going to be when you move on to the devices that we use, the end user devices. That's where Qualcomm is much more competitive. It just made a big announcement with Microsoft around these so-called AI PCs, and they all running Qualcomm chips. Nvidia doesn't have something competitive in that sector.
Okay, that's interesting. Meanwhile, we heard a little snippet of the CEO, Jensen Huang, who's gaining in profile, some dubbing him the kind of Steve Jobs of AI. He talks about this being a new industrial revolution. This really does seem to be his moment, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in Jensen Huang's eyes, he's always been on the rank of Steve Jobs. He is one of those initial early co-founders of Silicon Valley companies. He's been doing this for a very long time. He's been optimistic about Nvidia and its potential to change the world. It's just that everyone seems to be catching up with him at this point.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.